Shabbos, everyone. I want to share with you a little thought on Parshat VeYechi. In particular, I wanted to talk about the bracha that Yaakov gives to his son Yehuda. He gives all his children blessing as he's about to die, well over 100 years old. But he gives a very special bracha, a very special blessing to Yehuda, and says that the scepter will never leave him. In other words, that Yehuda will be for all time recognized as the leader, as the source of kingship amongst the Jewish people. And the question is, why is Yehuda selected for this position? He's not the firstborn. That goes to Ruvain. He's not without sin. He was involved in the selling of Yosef. He's not necessarily even the most favorite of Yaakov's children, right? Clearly, it seems that Yosef is a more favorite child. And we even see this in the fact that Yaakov gives a double blessing to Yosef, to give to Yosef, in that he blesses also Yosef's children. So what is it about Yehuda that inspires Yaakov to want to give him this blessing of leadership? And we can add one more question. Why doesn't he give it to Yosef? We already know that he is, indeed, as I've suggested, his favorite. But more than that, he already has proven leadership skills. He's the leader of the world almost at this point in time. Only second to Paro in the most powerful empire in the world. He's a natural choice, is Yosef. So why is it the focus on Yehuda? To answer this question, I want to take a step back for a little bit and talk about another leader in Jewish history, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who was the chief rabbi of not only the state of Israel, but before that, of the Israeli Defense Forces. In fact, the first. Many of you may remember him in that iconic picture of Rav Goren when, in the Six-Day War, the IDF retook the Temple Mount, and there's a famous picture of him with a shofar blowing it at the Kotel. What you may not know about Rav Goren, though, is during that entire battle, during the Six-Day War, he wasn't just showing up for these iconic photo shots. Very often he was running in front of all his soldiers. He would be running ahead of them, blowing his shofar, blasting as they're going forward. And it had a double effect. One was perhaps on the enemies of the Jewish people, who were somewhat shocked. Who is this crazy man running ahead of everyone else with a shofar? And also as a source of inspiration to the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, who would say, if this rabbi can run ahead of us without weaponry, but just with a shofar, with so much faith and enthusiasm, then certainly we can follow him as well. Now, I want to add one more thing about Rav Goren. In terms of the creation of the rabbinate within the Israeli Defense Forces. Before he was a rabbi, David Ben-Gurion, in the late 1940s, approached him and asked that he would become a rabbi in the IDF. At that point in time, Rav Goren, as I mentioned, was not a rabbi, or was not a official rabbi in the IDF, just a regular soldier. And at first he demurred. He says, no, I'd rather stay with my unit rather than becoming the chief rabbi of the IDF. David Ben-Gurion pressed him further, and Rabbi Goren agreed, but on one condition. The reason why David Ben-Gurion wanted there to be a rabbi on the IDF, because there were some religious soldiers, and they would need attending to, right, in terms of their food, in terms of Shabbat observance, in terms of whatever spiritual needs they may have. Rav Goren said he would only become the rabbi of the IDF if he was not the rabbi for just the religious soldiers, which was David Ben-Gurion's vision, but rather that he would be the rabbi for all of the soldiers, including the non-religious. One example where you could see this is in his insistence that the entire army become kosher. And Ben-Gurion acceded to this request that Rav Goren would be the chief rabbi of all soldiers, and he would provide services and inspiration and guidance to all soldiers, not just those seeking them out, the religious soldiers. One of the examples of how this came to a head is, as I mentioned, in this the desire to have a kosher kitchen. Once, during one of his many field visits, Rabbi Goren confronted a young commander who was already making a name for himself, but became much larger and more famous in years later, Ariel Sharon, who was the head of the paratroopers. And Rav Goren checked and saw that Ariel Sharon was not keeping a kosher kitchen for his soldiers. And Sharon told him, listen, I don't have any religious soldiers whatsoever in my unit. When I get my first religious soldier, then I'll be more careful and I'll allow there to be a kosher kitchen. Rav Goren, on the spot, according to many, volunteered to become a paratrooper so that he would be the first of Ariel Sharon's soldiers to require kashrut. He, in fact, joined. He went through the training. He did everything he did. And then he, in fact, jumped out of an airplane. His first jump, interesting or ironically enough, he actually breaks his leg. But to no matter, he got his wings, and Ariel Sharon committed, as a result of that commitment, to keeping his unit also with a kosher kitchen. Now, how does this help us with the question of Yaakov choosing Yehuda? So to me, Rav Goren was a wonderful leader, and what made him great and a special leader is something twofold. First of all, he developed a tremendous responsibility, during a sense of achrayut, on everyone, right? He didn't want to serve just the religious soldiers. He wanted to serve all the soldiers. And the second thing he did is he didn't separate himself in form of his leadership. Rather, he enmeshed himself with others, right? He jumped out of the plane. The way he decided to become a leader was to become part of the people he was leading. Very often, in today's time especially, leaders separate themselves. They become above. They elevate themselves over the people that they are leading. Rav Goren did the opposite effect, right? He wanted to make sure that he was amongst and a part of those he led, which of course inspired a greater sense of trust. And I think that helps explain a little bit of the difference between Yehuda and Yosef. Yosef is clearly a wonderful leader. I mean, he rose to the cream of the crop, but he was always above or separate from the people he was leading, right? Even when the brothers come back down, he puts them in a place for them to live, but he doesn't live with them. He's separate from them. Contrast that with Yehuda. Time and time again, the Torah tells us he's with his brothers. Even when he's sinning with selling of Yosef, he was with his brothers. He travels with his brothers. And when he comes to live in Egypt, he lives with his brothers. He's constantly a part of them at all times. He's from the people. He's mixed in with the people. I think there's a beautiful word that really makes this point quite poignantly. When Yehuda commits to protecting his brother Benjamin, who's been taken captive under the ruse that Yosef has been engaged in for the past several parshiot. What does Yehuda say he will be? He says, I will be an arev. I will be his guarantor. I will make sure that he returns, make sure that he is safe. Now the word arev, certainly, as I mentioned, means guarantor, someone who is going to protect another. But the root of guarantor actually has a few different meanings. Arev, guarantor, also is connected to the word erev, right? Like erev Shabbat, that mixes the day on Friday, the secular day, to Shabbat, the holy day. Or ta'arovet, which is a mixture of food that comes up very often when we're dealing with issues of kashrut or cooking on Shabbat. It's mixing. In addition to that, you also have an eruv, which mixes domains, a public and a private domain. So the word erev, or ayin reish bet, also not only talks about responsibility, but also mixing, of bringing people together from different backgrounds. That's what a true arev is. A true guarantor is someone who comes from within the group, doesn't separate themselves in that regard. And I think that is the real source of Yehuda's greatness and leadership. And I'll just end with one final story about Rav Goren that makes this point so powerfully. It's May 14th, 1948, the day that Israel, of course, becomes established. And there's a war instantly, right? Israel is invaded by the surrounding countries. So the commander of the Jerusalem forces asks Rav Goren that he should plead with yeshiva students learning in Jerusalem, there were many of them, telling him that the soldiers are really, it's a very thin line at this point in time. They're really overmaxed in terms of their responsibilities. And there's a great fear that the Jordanians will invade. And we just don't have enough manpower, and we need extra people to dig ditches around Jerusalem. So when the troops, the Jordanian troops come in, particularly their tanks, the ditches will slow them down a little bit and give us a little bit more time to defend ourselves. The problem, of course, is that May 14th at night is a Shabbat. And so it's it's not likely that the yeshiva students will be prepared to engage in this activity, if at all. Rav Goren decides that he will take upon this job of asking the yeshiva students in Jerusalem, there are many, to engage in this inglorious job of digging ditches, but also a very necessary job. And even though he felt it was a violation of Shabbat to be digging ditches on Friday night, he also thought it was a matter of pikuach nefesh. And he personally goes from yeshiva to yeshiva to yeshiva, making the case that it's a matter of saving lives, it's pikuach nefesh, and it becomes a mitzvah to actually dig the ditches on Shabbat rather than a violation of Shabbat. And he gets them to do it. Yeshiva students go out Friday night, dig ditches, and when the Jordanian soldiers the next morning try to invade Jerusalem from the north, the first tank falls into one of the ditches that was dug over the course of the night. And then a second tank begins to go down, and the Jordanians realize it's not worth it, and they go around, and it delays them long enough for the Israeli soldiers to step forward. An incredible salvation takes place thanks to the work of these yeshiva students. Now, the Jerusalem commander could have bypassed Rabbi Goren and gone straight to the yeshivas to get this extra manpower. It is very unlikely that they would have responded to his requests. Someone coming from the outside asking them to violate Shabbat get thrown out. Similarly, you could have had many Rosh Yeshiva who could go to the yeshivot and make the case and say, listen, this is pikuach nefesh, saving life. You have to do it. But they didn't even know of the need, nor necessarily were they inclined to help the need be fulfilled because they had no connection to the Israeli army at that point in time. What makes Rav Goren's role so crucial is that he lives in both worlds, that he has the language of both worlds and has the concern and connection to both worlds. He is an arev, a guarantor, because he is me'urav, he is mixed between the people he is serving. That's what leadership ultimately is about, and that, I believe, we learn from Yehuda, and that's why he is chosen, for always have the leadership come from him, as opposed to any of the other sons.